Okay, so we've got this pilot running in the northern Tasmanian NRM region, the 8 municipalities that make it up. And it's a pretty interesting little pilot. It's put together by the ANU and the Department of Ag, Water and Environment out of Canberra. So basically, this is exploring, it's the first step in exploring a market mechanism which can be used to buy and sell biodiversity services, right, to help improve environmental outcomes and provide extra financial opportunities to farmers. That's what it's sort of designed for. So essentially new diverse environmental forest plantings under this pilot program will be eligible to receive both Australian carbon credit units that can be surrendered, traded, sold in a variety of markets. And also, in addition to that, cash payments for biodiversity benefits. So that's what makes this one special. But the first thing, of course, is are landholders going to be eligible for this? There's a list of eligibility criteria. I'm not just seeing anyone else trying to join at the moment. I'm not sure if I'm getting the pop-ups, but anyway. First eligibility criterion is that it must be on freehold land predominantly used for agricultural purposes. So not backyards, not plantation forestry estates, etc. It's got to be within those 8 municipal areas within the region. It has to be a diverse native planting. They're talking about a minimum of 2 tree species, 4 shrub species, plus ground covers. There's actually a planting guide for the northern NRM region of Tassie that sets all this out. And the size of these plantings has to be between a minimum of 5 hectares and a maximum of 200 under the current pilot. But it's important to note that even if you're going for that minimum 5 hectares, it doesn't have to be one contiguous chunk. It can be a bit there and a bit there and a bit there, adding up to 5 hectares. So it must be a new planting undertaken next year. No ground prep or other work started yet. So if you've mound ploughed or sprayed, well, you were going to do it anyway. It won't meet the additionality criteria and will not be eligible. If you've received any other government support for this project, such as incentive funding from NRM North or similar, is not eligible. And of course, it has to be protected. The planting has to be protected and maintained for a permanent period, but you get to choose if it's a 25-year or 100-year permanent period. And there's some pros and cons there, which I'll get into a little bit later. Any questions so far?
I've got one around the diverse plantings, but maybe we'll go into that later when you talk about 50% of the trees or species need to be eucalypts or whatever it is.
All right, so another one of these criteria is that it has to be on land that's been clear of forest or plantation vegetation for the last 7 years or 5 years if it's changed, the land's changed hands during that time. Now, I mean, the definition of forest vegetation is any woody veg over 2 meters tall with a crown cover of 20%. That's one of the old Kyoto definitions of a forest. So a big old gorse patch would actually be classed as a forest. But however, as the rules are, if it's a declared weed, as in that forest definition, you are allowed to clear it and use it for a cover plantation. All right, so let's say you've met all the eligibility criteria to participate in this pilot. So the another thing is, well, you can write your application, but how are you going to make it successful, right? The project applications will be approved or declined based on a cost-benefit score relating to the regional benefit to biodiversity conservation. All right, that's what they're trying to buy, those sort of outcomes with this cash payment to the farmers. And also the cost of it. So, you know, if it's a small chunk of veg in an otherwise cleared landscape, and it's going to be very expensive to plant, that won't look really good. What's the biodiversity outcome you're getting there for that big investment, right? So tips for project success include a larger planting area will look better. If there's threatened veg communities or threatened species there in the immediate vicinity, that's going to help. Of course, planting the local veg communities will look good. You can include areas with big native, like big paddock trees or like little bits of remnant veg in the planting area. They'll be excluded from the carbon estimation, but they will look good in terms of biodiversity conservation because you're linking good habitat trees up. Riparian or anything close to fresh water's got a bonus. And they also like the 100-year permanence option as well. Right. So next question, how does this pilot actually work? Well, unfortunately, the applications are due in 3 weeks' time. Once applicants have put their online application in, submitted it, some months later, they will be advised of the success of their application. The successful applicants will then be given an offer of a biodiversity payment. Not a payment, but an offer. If they like that offer, right, then the next step is to register the project as an official carbon offset with the Clean Energy Regulator. So it becomes an offset project under the Emissions Reduction Fund rules. And the applicant will at this stage need written consent from all interest holders. So, you know, the trust, the bank, if there's a mortgage or any interest there. It is possible if it's a lease on Crown land, if you can get written consent from the Crown to give you the carbon credits from it instead of the carbon credits belonging to the Crown, etc. But that might be difficult. Anyway, so once the successful applicant has accepted the biodiversity offer and registered it with the Clean Energy Regulator as a carbon offset, they will receive 50% of the biodiversity payment up front before preparing the project, before planting. So that's a pretty good option. I mean, it's a good component of this pilot because that 50% payment will help to cover the planting costs. All right, so then the project manager or whatever term you want to give the landholder who's running this new pilot project now on their own land will undertake the planting, ground prep, spray, everything else, right? And in the first 2 to 3 years of the project, they will receive the rest of the biodiversity payment in 2 separate payments, a quarter each, to make up the 100%. So all the biodiversity payment is sort of front-loaded, coming early before the carbon credit units start getting provided. And then within the first 5 years of the planting, they will arrange reporting and auditing processes, okay, and then receive their Australian carbon credit units. So it's actually 5 years and 6 months because it's officially 5 years, but you get 6 months to do the report. Now, the auditing process will involve a cost as well. They'll have to engage an accredited third-party auditor for this. But still, that's 5 years away, and you've already received the entire biodiversity payment before this stage. The reporting is online, and then the ACCUs, those carbon credit units, are then you don't actually get them like a piece of paper to stick in the drawer. They're registered against your name in the official registry, kind of like stock market shares are. So then the project. Sorry.
The Clean Energy Regulator holds those ACCUs?
Not the regulator. They're in a government registry. I just can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It's got a long acronym. All right. So then the project manager can keep or trade their carbon credit units in government auctions to sell them to private individuals or companies, or sell them in other markets. So you can hunt around and look for the best price. Of course, you can keep them as well. You don't have to sell them straight away. But the recent price of ACCUs is $18, right? That's per tonne of CO2 equivalent sequestered. And the actual permanence period, if you go for the 25-year permanence, it doesn't start when you first plant these trees. It starts when you first receive ACCUs. So if you receive ACCUs after 5 years and 6 months, it actually becomes like a 30-year permanence, right? Anyway, so
what about the 100-year, Adrian?
well, that'd be 105, wouldn't it, Pete?
Okay.
Yeah, because you've got to wait 5 years before you receive the ACCUs.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So, I mean, any other questions on this, on how the pilot works? No. All right. Move on. How to actually apply, and this is important given you've got 3 weeks, right? Make sure you read through the pilot documents. There's quite a lot of rules there. There's the stuff involved with the emissions reduction fund carbon offsets, and then there's extra pilot rules on planting and specifics sitting on top of that. Okay, but there are lots of guides, fact sheets, videos available. We'll have a fact sheet out early next week as well, based on these slides for others that have missed them. The application form's online at agsteward.com.au. It's not too onerous, because this is just the bidding for the biodiversity payment stage. You know, if you get an offer and accept it, then there's the next stage of going through with the emissions reduction fund. So anyway, once you're on that online application form, select the Northern Tas region, map out the planting areas on the map. It will automatically exclude buildings and roads and things like that. Add in your project details, etc., and then the costs. It's important to include all the project costs in detail, such as how much you're spending on spray, ground prep on plants, on planting, labour, fencing, ongoing costs such as weeding and those sorts of things. Right, that helps them work out how much of a biodiversity payment they'll consider giving the landholder. It's relative to these costs. Now then you can choose whether to bid lower than those estimated costs. So let's say, for example, that you're really keen on doing one of these projects, but maybe with your own property, the biodiversity outcomes aren't going to be amazing, and you're worried your application might get rejected on that basis. You could actually bid, so if your planting project's going to cost $50,000, you could bid lower and say, well, I'll bid for $40,000 worth.
Put a bid.
Anyway, then submit the application and wait a little while. All right, so the government have provided a hypothetical case study. I chose the Tasmania one being the most relevant, right? I've just used their words here, but I've added some sections, emphasis in bold, because I think they're the most important points that we should focus on in this discussion. So, Rowena owns a 1,000 hectare property near Campbelltown, and she runs sheep. So to reduce lambing mortality and diversify her income, she decides to participate in the pilot. And this is one of the keys here. In designing a project, you should aim for co-benefits. It's not just, you know, getting carbon and biodiversity income. If you can get shelter benefits or something else out of it as well, it really adds up better. So anyway, so she plans to undertake a 15-hectare environmental planting, comprises a mix of shelter belts and block plantings. You can do that. I mean, there are rules on how wide the shelter belts can be and that sort of thing, but it's all in those guidelines on the website. So the full-cam model, which is the basis for this pilot and these projects, says that this 15-hectare environmental planting just outside of Campbelltown is likely to sequester approximately 280 tonnes of CO2 per hectare over the 25 years, right? So that number will be higher if you're in a higher rainfall, better soil sort of area, you know? I mean, well, there's decent soil at Campbelltown, but it all comes down to a range of different environmental factors.
And just one thing, Adrian, I think it says, and when you do these mapping things, it does the estimate of carbon capture.
That's exactly right, and that's what I've just included here. That 280 tonnes, it has estimated. Right.
It does it for you. Yeah.
Anyway, so after considering the requirements, she decides on a 100-year permanence period because that avoids the need to apply the 20% permanence discount, right? So if you're looking at that 280 tonnes per hectare over 25 years, if you do a 25-year permanence, they'll take 20% of your ACCUs off. That's the discount for that short permanence period. If you choose a 100-year permanence, you don't get that discount, but potentially it won't estimate the full amount of carbon the trees will sequester over 100 years either. Anyway, considering these requirements and the need to include that 5% risk of reversal buffer, her advisors calculate that the present value of the ACCUs, present value, is likely to be $3,400 a hectare, right, which is $51,000 worth of ACCUs for the whole project. Now, that 5% risk of reversal buffer, that's something the government takes off as a bit of insurance in case there's an insect attack or in case there's a fire or something like that. You'd never get the full amount because it's got to spread that risk over the country. You know, the other parts I've put in bold is that present value of the ACCUs. Now, remember that even if you plan in 2022, it'll be 2027 before you get ACCUs. And what will the value of those carbon credit units be in 2027? It's hard to know, but with the way things are going, it's likely, probably going to be higher than $18. So it's a bit hard to actually get the real value out of this. Anyway.
Adrian, just sorry, I'll keep talking here. With that, she's got a 100-year permanence. You're saying it's $51,000 for the whole project. Is that, when you say the whole project, what time period is it? When does she get paid $51,000 for the whole project?
Good question. So the crediting period for this project it's likely to be that 25 years. Okay, the first 25 years when the trees will be growing fastest. So the ACCUs would get delivered or assigned to the owner, Rowena in this hypothetical case, over that period, and there wouldn't be any ACCUs given in 90 years' time. And that $51,000 is based on the estimated sequestration from the planting project at the current value of the carbon credit units, okay?
Sorry, can I just clarify that, Dave here?
Yep.
So that's 51,000 spread over 90 years, is that right?
No, 51,000 spread over a much shorter time frame. As I just said to Peter, the crediting period of the project will be much shorter than 100 years.
Okay, yep.
Yep. Because, you know, no one wants to wait 90 or 100 years to get their carbon credit units. All right, so I'll just continue this case study, all right? So the area where Rowena wants to put the plantings is reasonably hilly. After consulting with NRM North, she decides the best way to establish the plantings is through manual tube stock planting. She decides to use tree guards to protect the seedlings from grazing impacts, and she's going to spot spray the sprite. You put all these details in the application. It's not really difficult though. And she's estimated the plantings will cost $4,200 per hectare to establish, or $63,000 in total. So under the current value of the ACCUs, it's not enough to pay for the planting. Now it continues. Rowena estimates she'll need to spend $60 per hectare per year, right? $900 per year in present value to manage the plantings and do all this reporting, right, for the emissions reduction fund under the pilot. And she needs to pay for 3 third-party audits of the emissions reduction fund. Now, these 3 third-party audits are arranged, that they're scheduled by the Clean Energy Regulator. So there's the first one at 5 years in, and then there'll be 2 more at specific scheduled periods within that crediting period, all right? But anyway, again, that's a down the road sort of cost. But anyway, as you can see so far, going on the present value of the ACCUs, it's still not earning enough in carbon to pay for the total costs of doing this. And then she submitted the application to the department, right? And they give her a biodiversity payment offer of $3,500 per hectare, or $52,000 in total. So now it's adding up, right? So if Rowena goes ahead with the project, she can receive the $26,000 up front when she registers the project under the ERF, and the following $26,250 in the following 2 to 3 years if she satisfies the program requirements. So that's what this pilot is. It's making a biodiverse planting for a carbon offset financially viable, financially beneficial. And if you're getting stock or crop shelter or some other sort of farm layout benefit from it as well, it becomes extra viable. Any questions at this stage?
So, sorry, Adrian, Dave here again. Just off that 15 hectares, in total, after all her costs, she's making about 20 grand. Would I be right?
It depends on the cost of the third-party audit.
Yeah, just roughly. Let's say it's.
Yeah. So it's. I mean, that's what's exciting about this. Remember, it's a pilot. The government's looking at implementing more of these sorts of things around the country, and they're just testing the waters first to see if this is good. If farmers are interested in participating in carbon and biodiversity markets.
But just, sorry, if I can just continue with that line of questioning. So it's about 20 grand. I'm just trying to do the figures in my head, not very well, but she's looking at about 20 grand over the project. Yeah. So $20,000 off 15 hectares over, say, 30 years. That doesn't add up at all from a purely economics point of view.
Oh, well, that's right. I mean, you would not rip up your irrigated clover sward to do this, right? However, if you've got some really steep country that's no good, you may as well plan it up and do this anyway. If you're going to, if you want to do some riparian revegetation where it hasn't been done before, or, rehabilitate an eroded area, if you're going to put a shelter belt in, then why not do it this way? Okay, but remember, but you're not. This is not about replacing productive agriculture.
No, I'm just trying to look at how a farmer is going to approach this if he's trying to pay his bills and he's doing all this effort.
Mm-hmm.
There's the environmental side of it, shelter belting and all that, but a farmer's got X amount of capital and X amount of labour, and he needs to employ that as efficiently as he can.
Yep.
So yeah, I was just trying to get the context of it. Yeah, putting it on a hill, etc. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. I'm just going to the next one.
What I see, I was just looking at figures. If you get the ACCU of 51,000, I think it was, plus the 52,000 biodiversity payment, that's a bit over 100,000 for the life of the project. And then you take off the cost of what it's going to cost, which is 63,000. I think that works out to about what, 45, 50,000 that you'd be in credit if you include the ACCUs at current price. Because I
minus
think
the auditing cost.
Oh, you got to the auditing cost. Yeah.
Anyway, look, I'll continue, right? So coming up soon, right, the government understand that this auditing cost and auditing process is a barrier to participation, okay? There was a public consultation done on this last year. The submissions are closed now, but they're looking at streamlining the auditing process to make it easier and cheaper for farmers, right? This will help increase uptake. I mean, it's not happening right now. I mean, they're looking at it, but the legislation hasn't changed yet. However, remember that if farmers are participating in this pilot now, putting their applications in, they won't be facing any audit costs until 2027, And the legislation may well have changed between now and in 6 years' time. Anyway, another thing that may have changed significantly is the price of carbon. So an important thing to remember about Australian carbon credit units is that they are highly credible offset credits. I mean, the rules, the audits and everything else around Australian carbon credit units are very rigorous. And so the ACCUs are considered very high value, highly credible carbon offset, okay? So you can trade, there are options to trade them internationally and they can command better prices than less credible offsets from voluntary schemes and so forth. So as more companies, more corporations and more governance increase their emission reduction targets, bring forward their carbon neutral targets, the value of carbon credit units is likely to increase, right? I mean, there's no guarantees in any sort of investments, but you know what I mean. But $18 seems a little bit too low. All right, now the Ag Stewardship Pilot, remember this is the first one, but there's another one coming soon, and that will be about remnant veg protection, remnant vegetation enhancement. I don't know exactly when this will be rolled out. It may be rolled out next year. And no guarantees it will be in the northern NRM region. They might choose a different region to pilot this next one, okay? But again, another complaint that farmers have about this pilot is, well, what if they've already planted the trees, right?
Exactly.
And what if this remnant veg protection? Well, what if you've already protected or enhanced your remnant vegetation? You're excluded from participating in these markets. However, the Ag Stewardship Program is trying to create a farm biodiversity certification scheme, right? And this is in the longer term about looking after the farmers who did, you know, quote unquote, the right thing many years ago, and that already have, you know, they will be certified that they're farming in a way that improves or assists biodiversity conservation, and then can participate in biodiversity markets due to that. All right. So that's the end of the slides. For further information, advice, of course, there's the Ag Steward website and phone number. The really long link in the middle there is to the, that's where most of the documents are. Of course, NRM North website has links to these important documents as well. Questions about reporting and auditing and so forth, the clean energy regulators got all these guides as well. And something I found out yesterday I didn't include on the slide is that with an emissions reduction fund project, even though the auditing is scheduled over the life of the crediting period, you can actually report and receive carbon credits more often. You don't have to have an audit with every report. So if you were going to sell or auction off the carbon credit units as soon as you get them, you can actually have a more frequent cash flow based on the reporting period. It could be, I mean, it depends on the size, the amount of sequestration and the project size. So the really, really big projects, like huge planting areas, they can report and get ACCUs every month. All right. Any questions?
Dave here again, Adrian.
Yep.
You mentioned something in there. I mean, it's not applicable to us, but it might be applicable to other people. That was in relation to someone's got a mortgage and they're going to shut off country for 100 years. So the mortgage holder would need to be in on the deal with regards to doing this stuff, because it basically affects the freehold of the country, right?
Yes.
This is Ella from the Clean Energy Regulator. How you doing?
Oh, hi, Ella. Yeah. I'm good. Thanks for coming along. I didn't know if anyone from the CER was here today.
No, I got up early. I'm really excited about this. So to answer your question, David, that there are two concepts. One of them is legal right. So you have to have legal right to carry out your project. Usually what that means is that you're the owner of the land. Now, if you sell that land, then the new landowner, either the new landowner takes over the project, or if they don't want to run the project anymore, then you do. And they can apply to revoke the project. And they would need to give back any Australian carbon credit units that had been issued to the project, or buy Australian carbon credit units and give them back. So that's definitely something to consider if you are thinking about a 100-year permanence period, is that cost could be quite significant. Like Adrian said, the price of carbon credits might go up in the future, which means it would cost you more to give those carbon credits back than you received for selling them in the first place.
Yep.
Now, there's another concept to consider, which is eligible interest holders. So if a bank has a mortgage on your property, that's called an eligible interest. Now, all eligible interest holders have to give consent to the project going forward before the project can receive any carbon credits.
Yep. No, it's not applicable to us, but I just just for other people who have got a mortgage on their farm or whatever, and just its effect on value and valuations of property, and therefore their ability to leverage finance, etc.
Yeah, this is definitely a key part of planning an emissions reduction fund project. Mortgages aren't the only kind of eligible interest either. So if you have easements or like gas pipelines, things like that running through the property, those can also be eligible interests if they intersect with the planting.
Yep.
But David, another consideration around value of the property with a carbon project like this is that if it were to change hands and you're selling the farm and you're thinking about the value, trees that were planted and they're not part of a carbon project are less valuable than trees that will be earning carbon credits.
Yeah, well, also though, that's depending on where they're planted. If you're on top of the rocky knoll, yep, I'm not going to do anything there anyway. But if they're planted in other locations, then and the centre pivots, that's right where the centre pivot's got to go, then have guess where the trees end up. So it's more valuable to the property owner if to knock over those trees on. They may be of great biodiversity value. You might get a bit of carbon credits, but if they're on reasonable country and the centre pivot needs to go there, then the trees are gone because you're not going to earn enough out of carbon credits to offset the value that or additional value you'll earn by flattening it all.
Yeah, that's right, David. So that's why it behooves anyone interested in doing this to thoughtfully design their planting area with due consideration. Like maybe after the pivot's been put in, or not on well-drained flat land.
Yeah.
But anyway, those are also very good points, David, anyway, and thank you for raising them.
Yeah, no, just one, I might talk to you offline if we could, because people probably wouldn't be interested. Just the very last part of your conversation about remnant stuff and where that's all going. The reason I say that is all this stuff that you've just spoken about, 2 days ago, we just finished doing it all. And you come out with just the most timely presentation that says, oh, by the way, you're not going to get any money for having just done all this work. So I think that'll be a big frustration with a lot of farmers like myself. We've been waiting for this sort of stuff to come on and waiting, and you're not going to get trees to grow unless you put them in the ground. So time's not on your hand. You have to put trees in the ground to make this work. And so feedback to hire is there are a lot of people out there that are trying to do the right thing, and we're just being frustrated by you just have to dig into your own bank account and suck it up and just go and do it if you want to buy a biodiversity outcome.
That's right, David. But you will recall I mentioned the biodiversity certification scheme. Now, remember that a lot of farmers all around Australia have been saying exactly what you've said to the government for years, right? It's not a new issue. So that's why in the media releases put out by Minister Littleproud and the Department of Ag, Water and Environment in Canberra, they're looking at making this certification scheme so that people like yourself who've done all this biodiversity protection things on your farm will be able to participate in future biodiversity offset or biodiversity payment systems or markets for things that you've already done.
Yeah, okay.
That's not what this pilot is about. Remember, this pilot is the first step in a much bigger process.
Sure, okay. Yeah, I might talk to you offline then about it. A bit more.
But yeah, fingers crossed that biodiversity certification scheme comes soon and farmers like yourself will be able to benefit from it.
Okay, thanks.
Good on you. All right, any other questions?
I've got questions about nitty-gritty things around plantings, but if other people have got more general ones, they go first maybe.
Yeah, well, look, Kerry, the nitty-gritty questions about plantings, it's all detailed in the pilot guidelines, and there's specifics for each region. So if you go on NRM North website, you'll see.
Yeah, I've looked at those, Adrian. There's still a specific question around what
right.
it actually means. So just when it says 50% of the plantings need to be trees or whatever, I can't remember what the wording was, whether that was actually trees or whether it's woody species, because if you're trying to regrow a woodland, then 50% of your species is not woody. So that was my question around what they would actually fund, and then whether we'd be allowed to infill plant what should actually be there to recreate a woodland, or whether that's not allowed under the guidelines.
Yeah, well, they're very specific about what counts as shrub and what counts as tree. And off the top of my head, I think it was shrubs or trees must make up 50%.
Right.
Yeah. So remember it's coming from the FullCAM model of carbon forest sequestration. So in the case of a woodland like down around Ross, they're worried about overestimating the carbon sequestration. Sorry, Ellie, you go on this. Yep.
Yeah, well, I can speak from the clean energy regulator's perspective. So the method, which is kind of like the rules that you have to follow in the planting, it's designed to work anywhere in Australia. So it's quite high level. And what it says is that the planting has to be appropriate to the biophysical characteristics of the region. So, and it has to be species that are from within their natural distribution. So there is also there's no specific requirement around the mix of trees and shrubs, and trees and shrubs have a special meaning in the method. A tree is something that can be where you can measure the diameter at breast height, so at 130 centimeters. So things like mallee, where the stems branch off down at ground level, might not be considered trees.
Oh, see.
But that requirement, the 50% mix of trees and shrubs, I think that's probably being set by the NRM groups. I think we've reviewed some of these planting guides across the different NRM regions, and it looks like different guides are kind of making different requirements there. So I think for the NRM groups and for people who are participating in the scheme, I think the main aim is to make sure that it's the kind that the mix of vegetation is what you would expect to see in remnant vegetation around that area. I think that's probably the best rule of thumb.
Right. So, okay, but ecologically, it's not necessarily correct, but we're stuck with it because it's in the guidelines.
Yeah, it needs to be at least, from the Clean Energies Regulator's perspective, at least 20% of the woody vegetation over 2 meters. There needs to be at least 20% crown cover of that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, sedges and grass and things like that, we don't count those towards the carbon stock in the project area. They don't go into the simulations about carbon stock. It's purely the woody stems.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. And what is an estimate of cost at the moment for an audit, carbon audit?
So they can be quite variable, but generally speaking, they're going to be between $10,000 to $15,000.
Whoa! Right.
Usually the first one will be quite a bit more expensive. Now, it's a little bit too early for me to say anything, but I think we're probably going to be making an announcement shortly around audits for projects like this. So we'll make sure that everyone in the NRM regions is across that announcement when it comes, so they can keep people informed.
Right, thank you.
That's great, Ella. So it looks like something's happening sooner than I thought.
So basically what I'm hearing though is it's the shrubs and the trees that are going to contribute to the carbon credits, and so it probably doesn't really matter if we add more species underneath it. We just can't. They'd be part of our cost potentially into the project rather than the project cost. An in-kind contribution.
Speaking generally, I don't think it will impact your eligibility to participate in the emissions reduction fund, as long as you can show that this is like an appropriate mixed species environmental planting.
Yeah.
But I think Adrian's right that you should consult with the Carbon and Biodiversity Pilot side of it to make sure that you don't fall foul of any additional rules that they've set to try to get the biodiversity benefits out of the planting.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do, is enhance the biodiversity benefits. Yeah. Yep. Okay, thank you.
And remember also that the applicants for the Carbon and Biodiversity Pilot will be assessed on the cost benefit ratio of their application in terms of contributions to biodiversity conservation. So an appropriate woodland environment for that area with appropriate ground cover, etc., will be considered highly, you'd expect.
So the other question I had, which I think we're okay, is that there is to be no contribution from, it's a part of other government funding. So when, right, because we've been in the stream fencing program, we're already fenced. So we have had a contribution to fence, but that's not part of the planting program. Is that separate enough?
My understanding is yes on that, in that your agreement was for a stock exclusion proposal. It wasn't about revegetation. Yep. If you'd been funded for a revegetation project, that would be double dipping. But
so we've in that project, we have to re-veg 10 hectares. So as long as we set aside 10 hectares of narrower than 30 metres that wouldn't fit into the program anyway, that's right, we'll be fine. Yeah. Don't
double dip on the same area.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your revegetation area in that agreement was mapped out, and that area was included in the agreement. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
And look, this is another one of those angles to look at. Remember co-benefits and putting the trees in the right place. Like, you know, what David, you were saying, don't put them where, you know, a future pivot might go. And that's really good advice. But if you've fenced off, you know, the stream banks, you've got a big buffer area, and it's good to revegetate it anyway for a whole host of reasons. I mean, one of which is bank stabilization. Well, why not get carbon and biodiversity payments with your re-veg anyway? Why do it without getting extra money and making it profitable?
pivot corners or other things may also be suitable.
I think that audit cost is going to have to come down a long way for
Yeah.
people to sort of see reason in it. It's a nice idea, it's a great project, but that or the audit cost is the killer.
Yeah, audit costs are worked into the pricing model that they've included here. So it's one of the considerations that they take. So there is an allocation for that within the pricing model when they work out the type of incentives they're willing to provide. Okay.
Good point. Thanks, Andrew.
Ella, just a quick question for you is with aggregation, if farmers get together to reduce the audit cost by joining together, could you just explain that a bit with aggregation and organisations that are involved in that side of things, please?
Yeah, so it is possible to have like a non-contiguous area. So you could have, 5 or 6 different properties in an area. You could even have properties across Australia participating in a single emissions reduction fund project. That's one way that can potentially cut costs for this kind of project where you get some scale to them. The number of audits won't necessarily change just because you have more areas, although the cost of audits might increase if it means the auditor has to go and do site visits across different states or different regions. I think a couple of things to consider with that and the carbon and biodiversity pilot is that there's a maximum size of 200 hectares.
So if you got 10 farmers with 15 hectares each, that would be a good scenario in terms of auditing costs if they could work together in an area.
Yeah. Now, I think the other consideration there with the carbon and biodiversity pilot is that I believe the project, each bid has to be from the owner of freehold land. So where there were, if there were plantings going on multiple freehold titles with different owners, I'm not sure whether that would work as a single bid or not.
Correct. It won't work as a single bid. The bids are on an individual landholder basis. So I believe the rules around the legal entity. So your ABN, you could have multiple properties in the region and they could all be included, but they have to operate under the one business.
So that throws out the auditing side of reducing the cost of auditing then?
Well,
At this
Andrew,
moment
remember,
in time, yeah.
Remember, Pete, that this is just pilot only. So it's keeping it narrow and simple for testing out a particular concept. So aggregation is not part of the pilot. However, remember that that the biodiversity payment is intended to cover the auditing.
Yeah, look, the other thing to bear in mind with aggregation is that it can really increase the administrative complexity of the project. So if you've got 15 different people participating, they've all got to agree to one person receiving all the carbon credits for those projects, and then that person would presumably distribute them. So you might be reducing your audit costs, but you're quite likely to be increasing your legal costs.
For sure.
All right, we're almost at an hour, so unless there's any other further burning questions, we might finish up. So look, we've hit 9:03, and I think we'll just leave it there. We'll be repeating this process again at noon for the people who couldn't make it this morning, and we'll put a video of the recording of the main presentation and so forth up on the web soon. All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone.